The third day of Suboptic 2013 kicked off with a keynote speech by Ed Parsons, geospatial technologist for Google. He spoke on the role of the Internet in the sharing of information. A particular focus was that there are billions of people who still don't have regular access to the Internet and the disadvantages that the information poor are subject to. But he notes that thanks to newer technology like smartphones, more people will have access to the collective knowledge of the world than ever before. The keynote speaker was followed by the conference's first roundtable. The topic was on the effects of the financial market on the submarine cable industry. It was moderated by James Dodd, and participants include Cyrus Mawawala, Torsten Thiel, and Richard Lucas. The participants fielded questions on a few different topics, but particular discussion about net neutrality and its future was held. Mawawala believes that the disappearance of net neutrality will take time, but will greatly benefit the telecoms industry.
Well, I think collapse is a strong word. I think net neutrality over the next few years will gradually diminish in its fundamental principle that as a pillar of Internet regulation. So regulators will be more relaxed about telecom operators striking deals with Internet companies like the Verizon-Google deal rumored two or 3 years ago.
And for the FCC is a very strong supporter of net neutrality. What's going to have to change there before it's going to actually change anything in America?
I think America's a funny market because they invented net neutrality, but the Senate is quite mixed. Generally speaking, Republicans are in favor of the free market, and they see net neutrality as a distortion of that market, which of course it is, because it's telecom operators subsidizing Internet companies, whereas Democrats are more in favor of a free and open Internet. But of course, if you implement net neutrality correctly, then both sides can be happy. So the Internet can still be free and open. If I'm an Internet user, I can still see all content on the Internet. It's just the quality of that content that will be changed if net neutrality rules are collapsed.
When that does happen, you said it's going to make a really big change in the telecoms industry. Right now, they're not getting a whole lot of benefit from the Internet as a whole. What kind of benefits are you looking at? How is the industry going to be affected by that?
I think in the last 10 years, when the Internet and specifically the mobile Internet has exploded, the lion's share of those profits have gone to Internet companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook, and not the telecom operators who supply the pipes. And I think if we're right in net neutrality rules collapsing at some point, then competitive advantage on the Internet supply chain will shift from Internet companies to telecom operators. And indeed, you're seeing that in other industries. So if you look at America, which is a leader here, if you look at the taxation situation, retailers like Walmart are complaining that they get taxed when they they have to pay sales tax when they sell, but Internet companies don't pay sales tax when they sell. And the American Senate is looking at that too.
During the day's oral presentations, Doug Madery spoke on how the interconnected cable systems react when one system suffers a fault. He gave examples of systems that were particularly susceptible to breakdown. Bangladesh is one because it has only one cable accessing the larger world. To combat losses in service, Madery says there's really only one answer: redundancy.
I think there's a lot more to the story as far as if they're interested in understanding how traffic's flowing and how internet traffic reacts to a cable break or a restoration. There's a lot of details that can be known. I think people maybe don't know what the state of the art is, but I think if you look at any of our blogs or the examples I give in the talk, there's actually a lot of information that can be had as far as what would the impact on their downstream customers, how did they react, which ones were offline, which ones had backup, yeah, there's a lot that I think we can contribute to that discussion.
Later in the day, Kent Bressie examined the regulations employed by governments to oversee submarine cable systems. During the regulatory permits and network security oral session, Bressie devoted time to explaining the complicated nature of national security and the lengths countries are going to for safety. The day finished with the poster show, where participants could directly present their papers to peers in the industry. Over 60 papers were represented, and topics included changes in the upgrade and new builds market, comparison of repair times by country, method of laying cable in Arctic waters, the cost of systems versus technical development, and many more.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, AP Telecom wrote an abstract paper on the importance of SLTE for new submarine cable pre-sales. So effectively supporting new systems, they need to have a best-of-breed solution. So somebody for the wet plant, the marine aspect, the repeaters and the cable, and then a new upcoming player such as the Sienna or Xterra on the SLTE. And what that does, it provides the most competitive cost basis for a new system to go in the water. AP Telecom specializes in pre-sales, and we believe it's extremely important to have an optimized cost structure to enable yourself to compete from a margin perspective and drive pre-sales, which effectively drives debt financing for new cables.
What kind of benefits would this system give to a company?
Well, for large bandwidth buyers, such as a traditional telco in the United States or Western Europe or in Asia, it would enable them to mesh their terrestrial networks and their wet networks. Currently, there has been a fragmentation, but we're starting to see that fragmentation really blend and get a little bit merged in terms of the capacity for wet and dry coming together. So Sienna's providing an end-to-end solution, whereas in the past you had a traditional wet key turnkey provider like an Alcatel or a Tyco or an NAC provide that service. And now Sienna's coming in or Xterra's coming in. So you're seeing a best-of-breed solution. Whatever providers their competency is, you're picking the best aspects and you're building the best system as possible to enable yourself to sell wholesale bandwidth to carriers, the content players, the high-frequency trading network providers that really enable a new system.
Takes repair data from all of the world's maintenance zones, so Yokohama Zone, MECMA, Atlantic Cable Maintenance Authority, SIOCMA, and it works out how long it takes for the ship to start the repair. So in some parts of the world, such as Indonesia, it might take 30 or 40 days just to begin a repair, whereas in other parts of the world, like the UK, it will only take 2 or 3 days. So we looked at the reasons, whether that's due to permits, not having enough ships, having a catastrophic outages that causes a queue of repairs, and we put numbers against all this data, and it puts a spotlight on countries where there's a bad permit situation resulting in the government precipitating these delays. And what we want to do is have people who lobby the government to take notice of our paper and use that to improve the repair times in parts of the world where it's very, very slow to get our cables fixed at present.
So what country actually took the cake for worst permit situation?
Indonesia, which is not a surprise to anyone. They've got a pretty bad reputation for.
Right, so what can you tell me about your paper?
Well, I think the key to us building a network through ice-prone areas of the Arctic is dig it deep and go home. And the real issue is the pre-engineering that has to be done on this network, and that we've already done a significant amount of ice scour studies just to determine, the original feasibility of it. And typically, people think of big icebergs, the Titanic, all that kind of stuff, and they think of some of the issues that have taken place in Greenland, where they did have a couple incidents where a couple icebergs backed up into their fjord at Nuuk and crushed the cable. In our particular instance, we deal with a different type of ice. When we go through the Labrador Strait, where all the iceberg alley, our network is going to be anywhere from 600 to 3,600 meters below the ocean surface. So the deepest tail or fin on an iceberg ever recorded has been in the neighborhood of 550 meters, and we think that was in excess of 800,000 years ago. And anything that we see in recent years is generally 130 to 140 is the absolute maximum that's been seen. So we don't have that constraint. Our biggest issue is pack ice, so that the ice during the winter will freeze to a depth of about 2.3 or 2.5 meters. And when it melts in the summer months, it ends up packing up. So you can have hummocks that push up at the shore edge or bummocks that get pushed down. It's the bummocks we worry about, and bring it so that it can scour the ice, scour the seabed to anywhere up to 1.6, 1.8 meters depth. So at those few places where we do land, we have to dig it deep or put horizontal pipes to do that. In certain instances where we have absolutely critical installations, we put duplicate landings. So we have, in our case at Cambridge Bay, 2 fibers that go to the east, 2 fibers that go to the west.
All right, so what can you tell us about your paper?
Well, it's a case study about our views on upgrade market and how it affects O&M costs. There's two basic models that have been run over the years for submarine cables. They're equitable in some circumstances, they're not equitable in all circumstances. So what we've tried to do is to do a bit of myth busting, show when it works, when it doesn't work, and draw a few simple conclusions, try and stimulate debate, which it's done quite well today, and try and get maybe people to sit down and think about upgrades when they're putting their CNMAs together at the beginning, so we don't run into roadblocks later on in the life of the system. In a second.
So among the myths that you have busted about upgrades, what do you think is the most surprising for people?
Not necessarily partaking in an upgrade is not necessarily the best step of an owner of the system, because he misses out on a chance to have his equipment refreshed and get all the benefits of modern technology because he's saying no.
The last day of the conference, Emmanuel de Cerveray will give a keynote speech, which will be followed by a roundtable on the African region. Follow STF today on subtelforum.com for the latest of Suboptic 2013 coverage. This episode was brought to you by Suboptic 2013 and AP Telecom.